Hi everyone, welcome back to another video where you paint along with me. So this time, instead of having a reference image, I actually have idlis set up in my studio and properly lit. And if you don't know, idlis are a type of Indian dish that are really yummy. And I'm going to be painting them along with some sambar and some coconut chutney. I can't vouch for how they taste, but I hope to capture the essence of the food. Painting from life is an invaluable tool. It really helps you focus on the things that matter and leave out extraneous details. The trick is to have good lighting and to set up your composition well so that your lighting really highlights your subject matter and what you're going for. You want to make sure that you have enough darks and you have enough lights and they play nicely with each other. As with any painting, if you're painting from life or from images, start with the big shapes first. Block them in. And that's what I did. I have a rough outline of everything and then just added base colors on which I can build. And it's important not to get carried away with how things look in the initial stages. I mean, my banana leaf looks a little bit crazy and I don't have enough lights and darks that I feel comfortable with the painting, but just keep going. For the banana leaf, I laid down an initial layer of phthalo blue and ultramarine blue, and I added cadmium yellow and Indian yellow on top to create greens on the canvas itself instead of my actual palette. And I'm going in and adding a little bit more yellow on the banana leaf. And I'm using my brush to create texture. I don't want the texture of the banana leaf to be smooth, so I'm just letting the brush strokes show, and I really like doing that. For the darker areas, I didn't use black. I love adding pure color into my shadows, into my paintings. So what I did was I used a mix of ultramarine blue, phthalo blue, and burnt sienna to create those ridges in the banana leaf. And same thing goes for lights. I don't always have to use white for the light areas. What I did was I used Naples yellow light. I mean, I don't know if I can make a painting without it. And I used King's blue, which is a great blue, and it mixes well with the underlying colors in there, and it creates this interesting variation in color and light as well. So a good tip would be to think outside the box when it comes to colors. How can you push the colors a little bit more and create more visual interest? And I also used a little bit of complementary colors in the banana leaf. I like to put a little bit of reds always in my greens to just kind of break them up and create some visual interest. And the banana leaf that I have is very detailed. It's got a lot of texture, it's got a lot of detail to it, but I don't want to get too stuck on it. I just want to give the suggestion of detail. If I get stuck on it, I will be stuck there forever. So I try to see what I can do to get away with the least amount of work for the maximum impact, really. I'm not going in and creating small little ridges every single time. I'm just letting my brushwork do most of the work for me. So you have suggestion without having to put too much detail into it. And you always want to push your lights and darks. You want to create drama in the painting so that your lights and your darks have context and they stand out. For my darks in the leaves, I am using a mix of phthalo blue, ultramarine blue, burnt umber, and burnt sienna, and I use a little bit of Mars black to gray it down. And I'm not depending on the Mars black for darkness, but I'm depending on it to gray down the chroma of the colors that I have. And so I'm adding in a little bit of details, those little veins or spines or whatever they're called. I'm adding that to the banana leaves so that the lights also have context and they help each other stand out. And every time I add in darker colors in the banana leaf, I go in and kind of make the edges a little bit fuzzy. I don't give them defined edges. They're there, but they're not really super defined. So that kind of helps keep the focus on the main subject, even though I'm pushing the lights and the darks in the surrounding areas as well. When I'm working on a painting, I like to take a step back, see what's working and what's not working, and how I can push the lights and the darks more so that I can get a better painting. So for this, I have to kind of tone down some of the darkness in the ridges of the leaves and make it a little bit softer, make the edges not as sharp, and then go in and reinforce the darkness that the idli and the containers with the chutney and the sambar are making. So I'm doing the same thing with the same mix of colors and reinforcing and pushing the dark of the cast shadow that they make. I'm working wet on wet with this, and I really like doing that for my paintings because I can create a lot of depth and darkness, and then I can use the wetness of the paint to kind of tone down the edges and blend them in. Took another step back to see where I could reinforce the shadows and the area around the idlis, and in between those two containers with the chutney and the sambar could use some darkness as well. So I'm going in and reinforcing that as well, all the while blending the edges into the rest of the painting. And this is also a time where I decide, okay, maybe my shadow's a little bit too boring. Great, I have the blues and I have the umbers, but how can I add a little bit more visual interest? So I went in and I added a little bit of cadmium red and burnt sienna into the shadows just to kind of push the contrast and play with color a little bit more. I like to remember every time I'm painting that it's my painting, and just because something looks a certain way doesn't mean I can't add color into it, and the painting will still read great as long as I get the values right. As long as the values have the right relationships to each other, your painting will still read very, very well, and it will evoke the object that you're painting. So you don't have to be restricted by, just the dark grays or whatever it is that you're using to create depth. You can use a little bit of color to create interest, and that's what I really love to do. For example, for the idlis, I didn't just use white, and I didn't just use black to gray it down. What I used were a host of colors. I used burnt sienna, burnt umber, raw umber, ultramarine blue, lilac, and Egyptian violet, as well as just a touch of Naples yellow light, all working together. And I know maybe the camera might not have picked all the nuance up, but there's very few places that I'm just using pure white. I'm using pure white now because I want the highlight to stand out. But even your whites have variation in them, and you don't want just a plain white thing on your canvas. You want it to have interest. You want it to have nuance. I'm adding a little bit of white toned down with King's Blue and Lilac and pushing that into the rest of the idli. And I'm just going to go in and add a little bit of pure titanium white to just bring out a little bit more of that white. I wanted there to be real highlights, like something that really stood out against the rest of the toned down whites, and to play with the light more in the idlis. And I used many layers of colors to bring out the variation in the white. So I'm going in with a little bit of grayed down lilac, and I'm going to go and push that into the rest of the white and the rest of the idli. As I build layers, my paint is also getting considerably thicker, and you can tell that from the texture of the paint that I'm applying right now. Initially, it was very watered down with turpentine, but right now I'm going in with much thicker layers. And I also used Galkid as my medium, and I had used that in earlier layers, and I'm going in with thicker layers as we speak. Just because the idlis, those 3 idlis, are front and center and they're so bright, I want to add a little bit more depth to them, otherwise they don't read well for me. So I'm going in and defining the darks and the lights the way I see them, the way the lights play with each other. And that means giving variation in the darks as well. To play with the greens against the background of the idli and to play with the very cool grays that I've been using, I added a little bit of burnt sienna and ultramarine blue, and I mixed that together to create warmer grays the way I like it, and I'm applying that to the idlis just to give the shadows a little bit more play of color and temperature. And like I said, with the banana leaf, same goes for the idlis. I really want to push the lights and the darks. So I'm layering darks and lights constantly onto the idlis. Even though they are the lightest part of the painting, I'm trying to give them as much variation and as much depth and drama as possible so that it doesn't just lay flat and feel flat against the rest of the painting. Because the paint is wet, I can go in with a very dark color and push that into the rest of the painting to achieve nicer contrast. And this looks ridiculously dark right now, but I'm using a mix of ultramarine blue, phthalo blue, burnt umber, raw umber, and burnt sienna, and I'm using different variations of this to see what I want with the temperature and with the depth of the color and how grayed down I want it, and I'm pushing that again into the idlis to see how I can push my lights and darks. And it really helps that the remainder of the painting is wet, so I can experiment more and push that into the surrounding color and the surrounding paint. And if you want to see why it's so important to push your lights and darks and to create variation in them, and to not really just look at your painting as white and black and gray, I'm going to show you the difference. The two idlis on the right, I've created enough variation that the whites don't just look and read as plain white. I'm going to go in with some titanium white on the leftmost idli, and I'm going to show you how just adding white isn't enough to make your painting read nicely. It's too white, it's too bright, and it's just so distracting. So think really in terms of variations of whatever it is you're seeing. And one of the best ways to do that is to let go of the idea of, oh, I'm painting X object. Think of it as, okay, this is a bunch of shapes and a bunch of textures and tones and colors, and how can I best bring them out? If you can see over here, it's just too white and it doesn't really do anything for the painting, and it tilts the balance of the painting away from the painting as a whole and just pushes so much emphasis on that white little round or semi-round or whatever it is that it doesn't make the painting feel cohesive. And I'm actually going to leave the leftmost idli a little bit like that so that you can see why it's so important to give your lights and darks nuance, and see what happens if you don't do that, because it just stands out too much. And I'm going to go in and work on the rest of the painting while this just sits there. So I'm defining the edges and creating a little bit of softness in the edges of each idli. I'm going to go in and suggest some detail into the containers of sambar and chutney, and I'm saying suggest because I have a focus of the painting and I don't want to get too bogged down by minute little details. I want to hint at them. So I'm going to go to the edges of the containers and I'm going to define the shadows that they make a little bit stronger. and I'm going to give a little bit of lightness. They have an interesting reflection on them and they pick up the lights from the leaves. So I'm going to add a little bit of blue and yellow to my reflection and make that a little bit lighter and make it stand out a little bit. Because I don't want the containers to be too distracting, I'm going in and softening up any of the detail because it's really not the focus of the painting. It's just the suggestion of detail that I want over there. And I'm adding a little bit of King's Blue to the reflection over there to kind of pick up the same color from the banana leaf. And you can see how the same colors that I use in the banana leaf kind of repeat themselves into the remainder of the painting, into the leaf in the coconut chutney, into the banana leaf itself. It just creates this play and this visual harmony that I find very useful in my paintings. It just makes my paintings read better. And I still haven't gone in and fixed that ugly idli on the left, and I will do that in a minute, but I'm just going to go finish up the background, sign it, and fix that idli. And there you go. We are done. If you like this, please subscribe and leave a comment.